say that Americans today are any more vigilant about winning a war than those who lived in the 1940s. Back then, residents curtailed their use of rubber, of metals, even of certain foods to aid in the war effort. And in the case of roughly 120,000 people of Japanese descent, they gave up something even more basic. They gave up their freedom. Today, many people would argue through things like the Patriot Act, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act in Guantanamo Bay, we are experiencing a case of history repeating itself, while others would not consider those examples to be sacrifices at all to our basic freedoms. In both times, good people, people with true and noble intentions, made choices. History has shown some of the choices of the World War II era elected officials to be flawed. This is the 20th anniversary of President Reagan officially signing into law an apology to Japanese Americans for their treatment during World War II. But Governor Ralph Carr had no way of knowing that that would be the case in 1942, when he stood up for the rights of Japanese Americans. He did not have the foresight to know that by the end of the war, there would be no examples of espionage or sabotage on the part of Japanese Americans. He did not know that the 442nd Military Unit, comprised entirely of soldiers of Japanese descent, would become the most decorated in U.S. Armed Forces history. And yet Ralph Carr still took the stand he did in dramatic contrast with every other politician of his time. This is the leader we all say we want. The one who says, as Governor Carr did, quote, "Regardless of what it does to me, you may rest assured I will be governor in fact as well as in name." The one who says only half jokingly, before he's ever elected, that he will likely become the most hated man in Colorado because he will follow his principles. An elected official who does not stick a finger in the wind to determine which current he or she should follow that day. Now, it was not that Ralph Carr was uninterested in what people thought or what was on their minds. In fact, the opposite was true. He'd speak to anyone, his friends and relatives would say, anyone who was willing to engage in a conversation. There are numerous stories of men in three-piece suits being left in the lobby of the governor's office while he spoke his self-taught Spanish to farmers and ranchers who had just come in out of the fields. He hires George Robinson from the Union Pacific Railroad to serve as an information clerk. So the very first face you see when you enter the Colorado governor's office in 1939 is that of a black man. Ralph Carr would listen to anybody and everybody, no matter their race, their class, or their age. But after he had taken that input, it's safe to say he saw his job differently than we tend to believe our current elected officials do. You see, Ralph Carr said he did not take his job to feel the public pulse or to follow the popular demand. I think it's up to a person in my job, he said, to direct public opinion and not to follow it. 2/3 of us now these days tell pollsters we do not trust our elected officials. 2/3. It's an astonishingly high figure. We criticize them for pandering, for kowtowing to special interests, for being survey-driven, and yet we are the ones who have created this situation. We have turned the very individuals who seek to be our leaders into followers, because history has not proven kind to those who buck the public will to stand up for principle. They lose elections. It's completely accurate. And that's what happened to Ralph Carr. He lost one of the closest elections in Colorado history in the fall of 1942. Switch one vote in each of the state's roughly 1,500, 1,600 precincts, and the results are different. And maybe I've overly romanticized this story, but while Ralph Carr did not retain elected office in the fall of 1942, I believe that Ralph Carr retained something even more important. Ralph Carr retained his conscience. And that's what makes this story bigger than politics and elections, races and votes. Ralph Carr's tale is a life lesson for all of us, because we have all had situations where we did not stand up for what we believed in. Maybe we remember back when we were children and we didn't protect a kid on the playground. Maybe we didn't support a colleague at work. Maybe we simply didn't fight for our own principles. It has happened to all of us, and likely all of us live with some remnant of guilt for not standing up, if you will, while everybody else is sitting down. There is a poem that's displayed at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, written by a German pastor, the Reverend Martin Niemöller, who spent the last couple of years of World War II himself in a concentration camp. And he wrote, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." Ralph Carr did not wait to speak out. His story is a call to action. If we get another opportunity to be courageous, to get past the feeling that we all have of simply not wanting to cause waves. And Ralph Carr was willing to accept his fate, to walk away, to do the right thing. Brings to mind the famous line from the former Senator Henry Clay, who once said, "It is better to be right than to be president." And if you had any doubt about Ralph Carr's integrity and how sincerely he believed in those principles, I want to share with you two last stories. The first deals with a woman named Michi Terasaki, who lives here in Denver. She was a Coloradan who had passed the civil service exam before the war, but who couldn't get a job. She approaches Governor Carr after a speech that he makes and shares her story. He takes her name and number, calls her personally the next week to tell her that she's been hired. And if that's not enough, she tells of the only other time in her life that she spoke with Ralph Carr, and that was when he called her shortly after Pearl Harbor. And he said, "If you're scared to come to work, I will send my car and my driver for you." The second story deals with a woman named Wakako Demoto, who was interned at Camp Amachi. That was the internment camp in southeastern Colorado, until Ralph Carr brings her to Denver just days before leaving office, after losing an election that he believed he lost because of his stand on behalf of Japanese Americans. She lives at his house, he pays for her to take college classes, and she serves as a nanny for his first grandchild. All the while, his neighbors here in Denver, terrified that there's someone of Japanese descent now living among them, are talking over the fences, "Aren't you worried when you wake up in the morning? The little girl will be dead." We get the kind of political leadership, President Kennedy once wrote, be it good or bad, that we demand and that we deserve. We the people are the boss. And when Ralph Carr died in the fall of 1950, he was running again for governor. One of his campaign planks was that he had always stood up for the rights of American citizens. When he passed away just after the primary, he was memorialized throughout the state. And maybe the most poignant tribute came from a political columnist by the name of Alva Swain, who wrote simply, "Ralph Carr was a friend to man. What more needs to be said?" I thank you for your time, for your sincerity, and your graciousness in hosting me today. Thank you very much.